I trusted you with my life, and you were literally planning to take it. Marcus stood at the altar, microphone in hand, staring directly at his bride-to-be as 300 wedding guests fell into stunned silence. Tell me, Sarah, when exactly were you going to harvest my kidney? Before or after our first dance? The gasps that erupted from the crowd were nothing compared to the color draining from Sarah's face as she realized her carefully constructed lie was about to become the most public destruction in wedding history. What would you do if you found out your wedding was just a setup, your heart used, your life planned, and your body secretly chosen as a match for something you never signed up for? Would you cancel it quietly, or expose it before the entire world? 2 weeks earlier, Marcus Chen had been the happiest man alive. At 32, he'd finally found his perfect match in Sarah Williams, or so he believed. Their whirlwind romance had swept him off his feet in ways he never thought possible. She was everything he'd dreamed of, intelligent, beautiful, seemingly genuine, and most importantly, she appeared to love him for who he was, not what he could provide. Marcus worked as a software engineer for a mid-sized tech company in downtown Seattle, living a comfortable but modest life in his Capitol Hill apartment. He wasn't wealthy by any stretch, but he was stable, kind, and had what his mother always called a good heart. That good heart, as it turned out, would nearly be his downfall, literally. The discovery happened on a rainy Tuesday evening, 3 days before their planned Saturday wedding. Marcus had stopped by Sarah's upscale Belltown apartment to drop off some wedding programs that had arrived at his place by mistake. She wasn't home, but she'd given him a key months ago, another sign of trust that now felt like a weapon. He'd planned to simply leave the programs on her kitchen counter and head home to finish his bachelor party preparations. But as he set down the boxes, Sarah's laptop chimed with an incoming message. The screen was open to what looked like a medical portal, and without thinking, Marcus glanced over. What he saw made his blood freeze. The screen displayed detailed medical records, his medical records. Blood type, tissue compatibility markers, organ function tests he'd never even heard of. But it wasn't just the presence of his private medical information that sent ice through his veins. It was the annotations. Perfect match confirmed, read one note dated just 2 months ago. Proceed with timeline as discussed. Marcus's hands trembled as he scrolled through more documents. Text message screenshots between Sarah and someone named Richard Blackstone filled the screen. His throat constricted as he read message after message detailing a plan so methodical, so cold, that he had to read it twice to believe it was real. Richard, Emma's getting worse. The doctors say she has maybe 6 months without a transplant. Sarah, I know. I'm handling it. Marcus trusts me completely now. He'd do anything for me. Richard, good. Remember, it has to look accidental. The marriage gives you medical power of attorney if something happens. Once you're on the honeymoon in Cabo, slip him the sedatives. The medical team will be standing by. Sarah, I understand. Though I have to admit, he's actually a decent guy. I almost feel bad about this. Richard, Emma is my little sister, Sarah. She's 22 years old with her whole life ahead of her. Your feelings don't matter here. Stick to the plan. Marcus stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. The sound echoed through Sarah's pristine apartment like a gunshot. His vision blurred as the full scope of the betrayal crashed over him. The woman he'd planned to marry in 3 days had never loved him. She'd targeted him specifically because his rare blood type and tissue markers made him a perfect kidney match for someone else. More messages revealed the depth of the deception. Sarah and Richard had been together for 5 years before she'd, accidentally, bumped into Marcus at that coffee shop where they'd first met. The meet-cute he'd treasured as the moment his life changed forever had been orchestrated. Every smile, every kiss, every whispered, "I love you," had been part of an elaborate con to gain access to his organs. The medical records showed they'd somehow obtained his information through Richard's connections. Richard Blackstone, heir to a pharmaceutical fortune, had the resources to access private medical databases illegally. They'd identified Marcus as a compatible donor for Richard's sister Emma, who was dying of kidney failure. But what made Marcus's stomach turn wasn't just the betrayal, it was how close he'd come to walking straight into their trap. The honeymoon destination Sarah had insisted on was a private resort in Mexico where medical procedures could be performed without the oversight of U.S. hospitals. She'd even convinced him to update his will and medical directives before the wedding, just to be responsible. Marcus sank into Sarah's expensive leather sofa, his head spinning. How long had they been planning this? The messages went back over a year. Every major milestone in their relationship had a corresponding message between Sarah and Richard, treating Marcus like livestock being prepared for slaughter. Sarah, he proposed tonight. The ring is smaller than I expected, but it doesn't matter. We're almost there. Richard, excellent. Emma's blood work came back worse this week. We need to move up the timeline. Sarah, already handled. I convinced him we should have a shorter engagement. He thinks I'm just eager to start our life together. The cruelest part was how thoroughly they'd studied him. Sarah knew exactly which emotional buttons to push, which dreams to validate, which insecurities to soothe. She'd become the perfect woman for Marcus Chen because she'd made it her job to be exactly what he needed. Marcus found himself laughing bitterly in the empty apartment. All those times Sarah had praised his generosity, called him too good for this world, encouraged his volunteer work at the children's hospital, she'd been programming him to be the kind of man who might willingly donate an organ to save a life. If she'd asked him directly, honestly, he might have actually considered helping Emma Blackstone. But they'd never intended to ask. The messages made it clear that Marcus was meant to wake up in a Mexican hospital missing a kidney and believing he'd been the victim of a random crime. Sarah would play the devastated wife, collect whatever insurance money was available, and Marcus would spend the rest of his life never knowing his own wife had orchestrated his mutilation. The sound of keys in the lock sent panic shooting through Marcus's system. Sarah was home early. He quickly closed the laptop and tried to compose himself, but his hands were still shaking when she walked through the door. Marcus. What a wonderful surprise, Sarah called out, her voice carrying that warm tone he'd fallen in love with. Now it sounded hollow, practiced. I thought you were staying home tonight to pack for the bachelor party. She appeared in the doorway looking radiant, as always. Her honey blonde hair was perfectly styled, her designer outfit immaculate. She'd never looked more beautiful or more like a stranger. I brought the wedding programs, Marcus managed, his voice barely steady. They were delivered to my place. Sarah smiled that smile that used to make his heart race. You're such a sweetheart. Always taking care of everything. She moved toward him, reaching up to straighten his collar in a gesture so familiar it made him sick. Are you feeling all right? You look pale. Marcus looked into her green eyes he'd gazed into countless times while telling her his deepest fears, his childhood traumas, his hopes for their future together, and saw nothing but calculation. Just wedding nerves, I guess. Oh, baby. Sarah's voice dripped with false sympathy. It's going to be perfect. Just 3 more days, and then we'll be husband and wife. Nothing will ever come between us. The irony was so thick Marcus nearly choked on it. But as he stood there, looking at the woman who'd planned to drug him and steal his organ, a cold determination began replacing his shock and heartbreak. If Sarah Blackstone wanted to play games, Marcus Chen was about to show her what happened when you underestimated a software engineer with a good heart and a very, very good memory for detail. You're right, he said quietly, forcing himself to smile. Nothing will come between us. Saturday is going to be unforgettable. The next 48 hours transformed Marcus from a heartbroken victim into something far more dangerous, a man with nothing left to lose and everything to gain from exposing the truth. But revenge, he realized, required the same meticulous planning that Sarah and Richard had used against him. Marcus spent Wednesday night in his apartment, surrounded by printouts of every message, every medical document, every piece of evidence he'd photographed from Sarah's laptop. His software engineering mind kicked into overdrive, analyzing the conspiracy like debugging faulty code. Every detail mattered. Every connection needed to be traced. The first thing he discovered was Richard Blackstone's true identity. A quick internet search revealed him as the heir to Blackstone Pharmaceuticals, worth approximately $800 million. His sister Emma was indeed dying of kidney disease, but what the text messages hadn't revealed was that Emma had no idea about her brother's plan. Richard had been searching for compatible donors through illegal medical database hacking for over a year before identifying Marcus as a perfect match. Marcus found Emma's social media profiles. She was a beautiful, vibrant 22-year-old studying art therapy at the University of Washington. Her Instagram was filled with hospital visits, dialysis treatments, and heartbreakingly optimistic posts about fighting the good fight and trusting in miracles. She seemed genuinely kind, nothing like her manipulative brother. By Thursday morning, Marcus had formulated his plan. He wouldn't just expose Sarah and Richard. He would do it in a way that maximized their humiliation while protecting Emma and giving her a real chance at survival. But first, he needed allies. His best man, David Park, arrived at Marcus's apartment that evening expecting a typical bachelor party planning session. Instead, he found Marcus hunched over his computer, eyes red from lack of sleep, surrounded by evidence of the most elaborate betrayal either of them could imagine. "Holy shit, Marcus," David whispered after reviewing the documents. "This is insane. We need to call the police." "And tell them what?" "That my fiancé is planning to commit a crime that hasn't happened yet. They'd need a confession or more concrete evidence. Besides, I want something better than just criminal charges." David stared at his best friend. "What are you thinking?" Marcus leaned back in his chair. "I'm thinking Sarah and Richard want to use Emma's medical condition to justify destroying my life. But what if we could expose their plan and actually save Emma's life through legitimate means?" "I'm listening." "Richard Blackstone has $800 million. Emma needs a kidney. Instead of stealing mine, why doesn't he use his resources to find willing donors through proper medical channels? The only reason they're doing this the illegal way is because Richard doesn't want to wait for the organ donor list, and he probably doesn't want the publicity of his family's medical issues." David nodded slowly. "So you want to force his hand?" "Exactly. But not just force it, obliterate it. I want to expose their plans so publicly, so completely, that Richard will have no choice but to use legitimate medical channels to save his sister. And I want to do it at our wedding, in front of everyone who matters." Marcus pulled up the guest list on his computer. "Look at this. Sarah insisted we invite her colleagues from her public relations firm. Except I did some research. Half these people aren't PR executives. They're journalists, bloggers, social media influencers. She was setting up media coverage for my disappearance. She was going to make you famous for being a kidnapping victim. Think about it. Wealthy American software engineer mysteriously attacked and robbed on his honeymoon in Mexico, kidney surgically removed by criminal organ harvesting ring. That's international news. Sarah gets sympathy as the grieving wife, Richard gets his sister's kidney, and everyone assumes it was random crime." David shook his head in amazement. "These people are sociopaths. Which is why we're going to use their own plan against them. They want media coverage. They'll get it. Just not the kind they expected." Marcus spent Friday finalizing his revenge strategy. He reached out to a contact from his volunteer work at Seattle Children's Hospital, Dr. Jennifer Martinez, a transplant coordinator who'd become a friend over the years. Without revealing the full scope of Sarah's betrayal, Marcus explained that he'd learned about Emma Blackstone's condition and wanted to help. "The Blackstone family?" Dr. Martinez sounded surprised. "Marcus, they have unlimited resources. If they wanted help finding a donor, they could access the best medical networks in the world." "That's what I thought too. But apparently there are complications. Could you look into Emma's case? Maybe reach out to their medical team?" Dr. Martinez agreed to investigate. Her call back that evening confirmed Marcus's suspicions. "This is very strange, Marcus. Emma Blackstone's medical team says the family specifically requested no outside donor searches. They claim to have a compatible donor already identified through private channels, but they won't provide details. Her doctors are concerned because Emma's condition is deteriorating rapidly." Marcus felt a cold satisfaction. What would happen if a compatible donor came forward through official channels? Well, if the donor was genuinely willing and the match was confirmed, it could potentially save months of waiting. "Why do you ask?" "Just curious." "Thanks, Dr. Martinez." That night, Marcus made his final preparations. He'd hired a private investigator to verify all his evidence and ensure it would hold up to scrutiny. He'd contacted a lawyer to make sure his public revelation wouldn't result in slander charges. He'd even arranged for additional security at the wedding venue, knowing that Richard Blackstone might not react well to being exposed. Most importantly, he'd prepared a presentation, slides, documents, recorded evidence, that would tell the complete story of Sarah and Richard's conspiracy. His background in software meant he knew how to create compelling visual presentations. By Saturday morning, he'd have everything ready to turn his wedding into the most devastating expose Seattle society had ever witnessed. But as Friday night turned into Saturday morning, Marcus found himself struggling with one final question: what about Emma? The young woman was innocent in all this. She was dying, and her brother's criminal conspiracy was her only apparent hope for survival. By exposing Richard's plan, Marcus might be condemning Emma to death. The thought haunted him until he made one final decision. He opened his laptop and began typing an email to Dr. Martinez. "Dr. Martinez, I want to formally volunteer as a kidney donor for Emma Blackstone. I've researched the process, and I understand the risks. I'm willing to undergo all necessary testing and procedures through proper medical channels. However, there are conditions to my donation that I'll explain when we meet." Marcus hit send and leaned back in his chair. Let Sarah and Richard try to explain why they'd rejected a legitimate donor in favor of their criminal conspiracy. By the time his wedding day was over, the entire city of Seattle would know exactly what kind of people they really were. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah: "Can't wait to marry you tomorrow, my love. You've made me the happiest woman alive." Marcus smiled grimly and typed back, "Tomorrow will definitely be unforgettable." Saturday morning arrived with typical Seattle drizzle, but by noon, the sun had broken through the clouds, a perfect metaphor, Marcus thought, for what he was about to do. The venue, an elegant ballroom in downtown Seattle's Four Seasons, was decorated exactly as Sarah had requested. White roses, crystal chandeliers, enough flowers to stock a botanical garden. She'd spared no expense, probably using Richard's money. As Marcus adjusted his tie in the groom's preparation room, David knocked on the door. "You sure about this, man? Once you start, there's no going back." Marcus looked at his reflection in the mirror. The man staring back looked calm, determined, and completely different from the trusting fool who'd believed Sarah's lies for over a year. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." The Four Seasons ballroom had never hosted a wedding quite like this one. 300 guests filled the elegant space, unaware they were about to witness the most spectacular public destruction of trust in Seattle's recent memory. Sarah had indeed invited journalists, bloggers, and social media influencers, thinking they would document her perfect wedding day. Instead, they would live stream her complete humiliation to thousands of viewers. Marcus stood at the altar, his hands steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to do. The officiant, Pastor Williams, was Sarah's family friend, another detail that would make the betrayal even more devastating. Sarah's parents sat in the front row, beaming with pride at their daughter's perfect match. If only they knew their daughter was a predator. The wedding party was assembled. David as best man, 3 of Sarah's carefully chosen bridesmaids who probably had no idea about their friend's true nature, and flower girl Emma Blackstone herself. Richard had insisted his dying sister attend the wedding, probably to add emotional weight to their eventual sob story about Marcus's tragic disappearance. Marcus watched Emma scatter white rose petals down the aisle. She looked fragile, her skin slightly yellowed from kidney disease, but her smile was genuine and hopeful. She had no idea her presence was meant to provide cover for her brother's criminal conspiracy. The music swelled, and Sarah appeared at the back of the ballroom. Marcus had to admit she looked stunning in her designer gown, a dress that probably cost more than most people's cars. Her father walked beside her, tears of joy in his eyes as he prepared to give away his daughter to a man she planned to mutilate and abandon. As Sarah walked down the aisle, Marcus caught sight of Richard Blackstone seated near the front. He was exactly what Marcus had expected, tall, handsome in an artificial way, wearing a suit that cost more than Marcus made in a month. Richard watched the proceedings with the satisfied look of a man whose elaborate plan was finally coming together. "Dearly beloved," Pastor Williams began as Sarah took her place beside Marcus, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of Marcus and Sarah in holy matrimony." Sarah squeezed Marcus's hands, her green eyes sparkling with what anyone else would have mistaken for love. To Marcus, she looked like a shark that had just smelled blood. "Marriage is a sacred bond," the pastor continued, "built on trust, honesty, and mutual devotion. It requires each partner to be completely transparent with the other, holding nothing back, sharing everything." Marcus almost laughed at the irony. Sarah was about to promise to love and cherish him while planning to drug him and steal his kidney within the week. "Do you, Marcus Chen, take Sarah Williams to be your lawfully wedded wife? Do you promise to love her, honor her, and remain faithful to her in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, until death do you part?" Marcus looked directly into Sarah's eyes. "I do." Sarah's smile was radiant, triumphant. She probably thought she'd won. "Do you, Sarah Williams, take Marcus Chen to be your lawfully wedded husband? Do you promise to love him, honor him, and remain faithful to him in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, until death do you part?" "I do," Sarah said, her voice clear and confident. The lie rolled off her tongue as easily as breathing. Pastor Williams smiled. "Before we continue with the exchange of rings, the groom has requested to share some words with his bride and all of you here today." This wasn't part of the traditional ceremony, but Sarah had agreed to it weeks ago, probably thinking Marcus would deliver some sappy romantic speech that would make her deception even more poignant. David handed Marcus a wireless microphone, the same one Marcus had tested that morning to ensure it would broadcast clearly throughout the ballroom and to the live stream feeds. Marcus looked out at the assembled crowd. 300 people who thought they were witnessing a love story. Social media influencers with their phones ready to capture the perfect romantic moment. Journalists who'd come expecting to write fluffy lifestyle pieces about Seattle's newest power couple. "Thank you all for being here today," Marcus began, his voice steady and warm. "Sarah and I are so grateful to have you share this special moment with us." He turned to face his bride, whose smile faltered slightly at something she saw in his expression. "Sarah, my beautiful bride, I have to tell you something. Something I discovered just 3 days ago that changed everything I thought I knew about our relationship." The crowd leaned forward, expecting a romantic revelation. Sarah's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly, the first crack in her perfect facade. "I learned that love isn't always what it appears to be. Sometimes, what we think is the greatest blessing in our lives is actually the most elaborate deception ever constructed." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. This wasn't the speech they'd expected. "You see, everyone, Sarah didn't fall in love with me because of my personality, or my sense of humor, or even my devastatingly good looks." A few nervous chuckles echoed through the ballroom. "She chose me for something much more specific. Something medical." Sarah's face went completely white. "Marcus, what are you doing?" "I'm being honest with you, sweetheart. Isn't that what marriage is supposed to be about? Complete transparency." Marcus gestured to David, who activated a large screen behind the altar. The first slide appeared, Marcus's medical records, showing his rare blood type and tissue compatibility markers. "These are my private medical records," Marcus announced to the increasingly tense crowd. "Records that somehow ended up on my fiancé's laptop, along with detailed notes about organ compatibility and surgical procedures." The ballroom erupted into confused whispers. Sarah grabbed Marcus's arm. "Stop this right now. You don't know what you're doing." "Oh, but I do know exactly what I'm doing. Just like you knew exactly what you were doing when you and Richard Blackstone planned to drug me on our honeymoon and harvest my kidney for his dying sister." The whispers turned to gasps. Richard Blackstone shot to his feet, his face a mask of rage and panic. "This is insane. He's having some kind of breakdown. Am I?" Marcus clicked to the next slide, screenshots of text messages between Sarah and Richard. "Let's ask the audience. David, would you mind reading some of these messages out loud?" David took the microphone with barely concealed glee. "This one's from Sarah to Richard, dated 2 months ago, perfect match confirmed. Proceed with timeline as discussed." The crowd's shock was palpable. People were pulling out their phones, some to record, others to call for help. David continued, "Here's another one. Richard to Sarah, once you're on the honeymoon in Cabo, slip him the sedatives. The medical team will be standing by." And my personal favorite, Marcus took back the microphone, Sarah to Richard, "I almost feel bad about this." To which Richard replied, "Your feelings don't matter here. Stick to the plan." Sarah was backing away from Marcus, but there was nowhere to go. The entire wedding party was staring at her in horror. "You want to know the really beautiful part?" Marcus addressed the crowd, his voice gaining strength. "They met first. Sarah and Richard were together for 5 years before she accidentally bumped into me at that coffee shop. Our entire relationship, every kiss, every I love you, every intimate moment, was an elaborate con to gain access to my organs." The ballroom descended into chaos. Guests were shouting, standing, demanding explanations. Several journalists were already calling their editors. The social media influencers were broadcasting live to thousands of viewers. But Marcus wasn't done. The saddest part is Emma Blackstone, Richard's sister, who's sitting right there in the front row. Marcus pointed to the young woman, who looked confused and frightened. "Emma is genuinely dying of kidney disease. She needs help." But instead of using his $800 million to find willing donors through legitimate medical channels, her brother chose to turn my wedding into a crime scene. Richard was pushing through the crowd, trying to reach Marcus, but the wedding security Marcus had hired blocked his path. "Emma," Marcus called out to the young woman, "I want you to know that I volunteered to donate my kidney to you through proper medical channels yesterday. Dr. Jennifer Martinez at Seattle Children's Hospital has all the paperwork. Your brother could have saved your life without destroying mine, but he chose the criminal route instead." Emma Blackstone burst into tears. "Richard, what is he talking about? What did you do?" But Richard was being escorted out by security, along with several of his associates who'd apparently been part of the conspiracy. Sarah made one last desperate play. "Marcus, please. You don't understand. Emma is dying. We were trying to save her life." Marcus looked at his bride, his almost wife, the woman he trusted with his heart, and felt nothing but pity. "No, Sarah. You were trying to murder me. There's a difference." The chaos in the Four Seasons ballroom reached a crescendo as Marcus's revelation sank in. Guests were pulling out phones, calling police, family members, anyone who would listen to the incredible story unfolding before them. The journalists Sarah had invited to document her perfect wedding were instead documenting her complete destruction. But Marcus wasn't finished. He'd spent 2 days preparing for this moment, and he intended to expose every detail of the conspiracy that had nearly cost him his life. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called into the microphone, his voice cutting through the noise. "Please, I know this is shocking, but there's more you need to hear. The crowd gradually quieted, drawn in despite the horror of what they were witnessing. Sarah Williams, if that's even her real name, has been living a double life for over a year. David, show them slide 5. The screen behind the altar displayed a timeline of Sarah and Marcus's relationship, cross-referenced with medical appointments, research into organ harvesting procedures, and payments to various medical consultants. Every major moment in our relationship was carefully orchestrated, Marcus continued. Our first date. Planned 3 weeks in advance after Sarah received confirmation of my blood type compatibility. The night I told her I loved her. That was 2 days after Richard Blackstone received confirmation that his illegal medical contacts could perform the surgery in Mexico. Sarah stood frozen at the altar, her wedding dress now looking more like a costume in some twisted theater production. Her bridesmaids had backed away from her, staring in disgust and disbelief. She convinced me to update my will and medical directives before the wedding, Marcus said. She suggested the honeymoon destination. A private resort in Mexico where, according to these text messages, a surgical team was waiting to remove my kidney while I was unconscious. Dr. Martinez, whom Marcus had invited as his guest, stood up from the crowd. Marcus, is this really true? Dr. Martinez works with transplant patients at Seattle Children's Hospital, Marcus explained to the crowd. She can confirm that yesterday I officially volunteered to donate my kidney to Emma Blackstone through legitimate medical channels. The process takes a few weeks of testing, but it's completely legal and safe. Emma Blackstone, still seated in the front row, was sobbing openly. I never knew, she cried out. I swear I never knew what Richard was planning. I thought I was just getting sicker and that maybe someday a donor would be found. Marcus felt genuine sympathy for the young woman. Unlike her brother and Sarah, Emma was an innocent victim in this conspiracy. Emma, you're going to be okay, he said gently. There are proper ways to save your life that don't involve destroying mine. But the medical team said there were no compatible donors available through normal channels, Emma protested. That's what your brother told you, Marcus replied. But it wasn't true. David, show them slide 7. The screen displayed a list of 5 potential kidney donors for Emma Blackstone, all identified through legitimate medical databases, all willing to donate, all discovered in less than 48 hours once Drive Martinez began a proper search. Your brother had multiple legal options to save your life, Marcus told Emma. He chose the criminal route because it was faster and because he didn't want the publicity of your medical condition affecting his business reputation. The crowd was now completely silent, absorbing the implications of what they were hearing. Richard Blackstone, heir to a pharmaceutical fortune, had risked his sister's life and planned Marcus's mutilation to avoid a few weeks of medical procedures and potential media attention. Pastor Williams, who had been standing in stunned silence throughout the revelation, finally found his voice. Marcus, I don't know what to say. This is beyond anything I could have imagined. There's one more thing, Marcus said, clicking to the final slide. The most disgusting part of this entire conspiracy. The screen showed a contract, a legal document outlining the financial arrangements of Sarah and Richard's plan. Sarah was being paid $2 million to marry me and facilitate the organ theft, Marcus announced. But here's the kicker, the contract included a clause that if I survived the surgery, she was supposed to stay married to me for at least 2 years to avoid suspicion, then divorce me and claim half my assets. Gasps echoed throughout the ballroom. Even in a room that had already heard the unthinkable, this detail seemed to push everyone over the edge. So not only was she planning to have me mutilated, she was going to stick around afterward to rob me financially while pretending to be a loving, supportive wife helping me recover from my random attack. Sarah finally broke her silence, her voice shaking with rage rather than remorse. You don't understand the pressure I was under. Richard threatened to destroy my career if I didn't help him. Emma was dying. I was trying to save a life. By ending mine, Marcus replied coldly. And let's be clear, You weren't under pressure 3 months ago when you texted Richard that you were actually enjoying the sex with me and that I was easier to manipulate than expected. The crowd erupted again, but this time the anger was directed entirely at Sarah. Several guests were shouting at her, calling her names that Marcus couldn't make out over the noise. "Security, please escort Ms. Williams out of the building," Marcus said calmly. "I believe the police will want to speak with her." As if on cue, Seattle police officers entered the ballroom. Marcus had called them that morning, providing all his evidence in advance. They'd waited outside until he finished his presentation, allowing him to expose the conspiracy publicly before beginning their arrests. "Sarah Williams, you're under conspiracy to commit assault, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, and conspiracy to commit illegal organ harvesting," the lead detective announced as officers approached the altar. Sarah looked around wildly, as if seeking support from someone, anyone in the crowd. But the faces staring back at her showed nothing but disgust and horror. "This is insane," she protested as the handcuffs clicked around her wrists. "Marcus is having some kind of psychotic break. None of this is real." "Ma'am, we've reviewed all the evidence Mr. Chen provided," the detective replied. "The text messages, the medical records, the financial contracts, it's all real. You're going to have a lot of explaining to do." As Sarah was led away, still protesting her innocence, Marcus felt a strange emptiness. He'd expected to feel triumphant, vindicated, satisfied with his revenge. Instead, he mostly felt tired and sad about how completely he'd been deceived. But then Emma Blackstone approached him, supported by Dr. Martinez, who had immediately gone to help the young woman process what she'd learned about her brother's conspiracy. "Marcus," Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I'm so sorry. I had no idea what Richard was planning. If you still want to help me through the proper medical channels, I would be grateful. But I understand if you never want to see any member of my family again." Marcus looked at this young woman who was dying through no fault of her own, whose brother had turned her medical crisis into a criminal conspiracy, whose hope for survival had been built on a foundation of lies and planned violence. "Emma, your brother's crimes don't change the fact that you need help," he said gently. "Dr. Martinez will coordinate your care through Seattle Children's Hospital. We'll do this the right way." The crowd, which had been watching this exchange in rapt attention, burst into spontaneous applause. In the midst of all the betrayal and conspiracy, here was something genuinely good, a man choosing compassion over revenge, life over spite. But Marcus's story wasn't over yet. As the police finished clearing the ballroom and the last of the guests filed out, sharing contact information so they could follow up on what they'd witnessed, Marcus realized that exposing Sarah and Richard's conspiracy was only the beginning. The real question was, what came next? 2 weeks after what Seattle media had dubbed the wedding from hell, Marcus sat in his apartment reading news coverage of the scandal that had consumed the city's attention. The story had gone viral nationally, with hashtags like #WeddingRevenge and #OrganConspiracy trending across social media platforms for days. Sarah Williams and Richard Blackstone were both facing federal charges. The investigation had uncovered an entire network of illegal organ trafficking connections, with Richard's pharmaceutical company serving as a front for accessing private medical records and identifying potential victims. Marcus, it turned out, wasn't their first target, just their most thoroughly researched one. The media attention was overwhelming. Marcus had given exactly 3 interviews, one to the Seattle Times, one to a national news magazine, and one to a podcast that focused on medical ethics. In each interview, he emphasized the same points. The importance of legitimate organ donation, the vulnerability of people desperate to save their loved ones, and the need for better oversight of private medical databases. But the story that had really captured public imagination wasn't just about the conspiracy, it was about Emma Blackstone. The young woman had undergone extensive medical evaluation at Seattle Children's Hospital, and Dr. Martinez had confirmed that Marcus was indeed a perfect kidney donor match. However, the testing had also revealed something unexpected: Emma's kidney disease was progressing more slowly than originally diagnosed. She had potentially years, not months, to find a donor through proper channels. Richard lied to me about how much time I had left, Emma had told reporters. He manufactured a sense of urgency to justify his criminal conspiracy. If I'd known I had more time, I never would have wanted anyone to be hurt trying to help me. The revelation that Richard had exaggerated his sister's medical crisis to justify his actions had turned public opinion even more strongly against him. He wasn't just a criminal, he was someone who had exploited his dying sister's trust to commit crimes she never would have approved. Marcus's phone rang, interrupting his morning news reading. It was David. "Turn on Channel 7, David said without preamble. "Richard Blackstone's attorney is giving a press conference." Marcus switched to the local news station, where a well-dressed lawyer was addressing reporters outside the federal courthouse. "My client, Richard Blackstone, deeply regrets the methods he employed in his desperate attempt to save his sister's life," the attorney was saying. "Mr. Blackstone is a loving brother who made terrible decisions while under extreme emotional distress. He has agreed to plead guilty to all charges and will cooperate fully with federal investigators to expose the larger organ trafficking network he became involved with." The reporter asked, "What about the allegations that Mr. Blackstone exaggerated his sister's medical timeline to create artificial urgency?" The lawyer looked uncomfortable. Mr. Blackstone received conflicting medical opinions about his sister's prognosis. He acted on what he believed to be the most urgent timeline. There was no intent to deceive his sister about her condition. Marcus turned off the television. Even in confessing, Richard was still lying, still manipulating the narrative to make himself look like a tragic figure rather than a calculating criminal. His phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Martinez. "Emma's final test results are in. She's cleared for transplant surgery whenever you're ready to proceed. Are you still committed to the donation?" Marcus stared at the message for a long time. Over the past 2 weeks, several people had asked him the same question in different ways. Why was he still willing to donate his kidney to the sister of a man who had tried to have it stolen? The answer wasn't simple. Part of it was that Emma truly was innocent. She'd been as much a victim of Richard's manipulation as Marcus himself. Part of it was that Marcus genuinely believed in organ donation as a way to save lives. But the biggest part was something he hadn't shared with reporters or friends. Saving Emma's life felt like the ultimate victory over Sarah and Richard's conspiracy. They had tried to turn his compassion into a weapon against him. By choosing to help Emma through legitimate channels, Marcus was proving that kindness and generosity didn't make someone weak or vulnerable, they made someone strong enough to choose hope over hatred, even after betrayal. He texted back, "Yes, I'm still committed. When can we schedule the procedure?" An hour later, Marcus was meeting with Dr. Martinez and Emma at the hospital to finalize the transplant timeline. Emma looked healthier than she had at the wedding, partly because her medical treatment had been optimized, but mostly because she wasn't carrying the weight of unknowingly participating in a criminal conspiracy. "Marcus, I can't thank you enough," she said as they reviewed the surgical schedule. "Not just for the kidney donation, but for exposing what Richard was doing. I had no idea he was capable of something like this." "How are you handling all the media attention?" Marcus asked. Emma smiled sadly. "It's been difficult. Finding out that your own brother viewed your medical condition as an excuse to commit crimes, it changes how you see everything. I've been in therapy, trying to process it all." "Have you been in contact with Richard since his arrest?" "Once. He called me from jail, trying to explain himself. He kept saying he did it all for me, that he was just trying to save my life. But I told him that if he really wanted to save my life, he would have used his resources to find willing donors instead of creating victims." Dr. Martinez nodded approvingly. "That's a very mature perspective, Emma. Your brother's actions weren't your fault, and you don't owe him forgiveness just because he claims he was motivated by love." Marcus found himself thinking about Sarah. He hadn't spoken to her since the wedding, though her attorney had reached out several times requesting a meeting. According to news reports, Sarah was also planning to plead guilty and cooperate with federal investigators. She was facing a shorter prison sentence than Richard, partly because prosecutors believed she had been coerced into participating in the conspiracy. But Marcus didn't buy the coercion angle. The text messages he'd found showed Sarah actively participating in planning his mutilation, even expressing excitement about the $2 million payment she would receive. She hadn't been an unwilling participant, she'd been a willing accomplice. Marcus, Dr. Martinez said, pulling him back to the present conversation, we can schedule your surgery for next Friday if that works for you. It's a relatively simple procedure for the donor, and Emma's surgery will happen simultaneously. Next Friday is perfect, Marcus replied. I've already arranged time off from work. After the meeting, Emma walked with Marcus to the hospital parking garage. Can I ask you something? She said as they reached his car. Of course. Do you hate Richard? I mean, really hate him for what he tried to do to you? Marcus considered the question. He'd been asking himself the same thing for weeks. I don't think hate is the right word, he said finally. I'm angry about what he tried to do, and I think he deserves whatever punishment he gets. But hating him would mean giving him power over my emotional life that he doesn't deserve. I'd rather focus on the positive things that came out of this situation. Like what? Like meeting you. Like exposing a criminal network that might have hurt other people. Like proving that people can choose to do the right thing even after they've been betrayed. Emma smiled. You know, before all this happened, I was pretty cynical about human nature. Being sick for so long, watching people treat you differently when they find out you're dying, it makes you lose faith in people's motives. But watching you choose to help me after everything my brother did, it's restored some of my faith. As Marcus drove home, he reflected on how completely his life had changed in just 3 weeks. He'd gone from being an engaged software engineer planning his future with someone he loved, to being a betrayal victim, to being a whistleblower, to being an organ donor for a strange